What's up, guys? Welcome to the Strong Triathlete. Today, we are talking about how to implement strength training into your endurance training. So, last time we talked about why we even need to worry about doing strength training. And we didn't get into all the details there, but we got into some of them. And if you haven't seen that, go check that out. But today, we want to talk about how to implement it. And so, this is going to be a very practical episode as far as how to lay it out in your weekly training and just some things to think about. And then we'll get into some specific movements and different things like that in the future. But first off, I just want to talk about how we want to lay it out, kind of like I said, big picture in the training template. So when we're looking at, again, thinking about why we're doing it, and we're doing it to help improve our endurance work, help us be more durable, help us be more resilient, so that we don't have as many aches and pains and injuries. So when we're thinking about that, with it, it's still not the priority in our training. The endurance work is our priority. So we want to think about that when we lay it out in our structure. So oftentimes when it comes to either marathon training or triathlon training, with triathlon training specifically, oftentimes I put the strength work on your swim day. So if you swim and strength train on the same day, it makes it a little bit easier to balance it because you're not having to worry about inhibiting your run or your bike a little bit more. If you're doing your run or bike, within hours of doing your strength training or before or after, it can negatively affect one or the other. With swimming, you can kind of manage that a little bit easier. So with triathlon, oftentimes I put that on a swim day. If you're only swimming 2 days a week, obviously, strength training, I guess that's a starting point, is you can get a lot out of 2 days a week, especially if you're coming from not having done it at all. If you come from a strength background, then it's going to be a little bit different. But we'll talk about people who are coming from an endurance background and they're wanting to implement some strength training 2 days a week. 30 to 45 minutes will get you plenty of results that you're looking for. So from a base level starting point, that's what we want to start with. 2 days a week. You want to keep it as far away from your key sessions as possible. So if you're a marathon runner or a triathlete, then specifically your hard runs, probably your hard bikes as well, you want to keep that as far away from that as possible, as far away from before that as possible. So let's say my hard long run is on Sunday, then a good time for a strength training session would be on that Monday afterwards. Yes, you're going to be fatigued. Yes, you're going to be tired going into it. Your legs are already going to be tired. But if you're doing it right and you're moving through a full range of motion, you're not worried so much about the weight. You're not going as heavy as you possibly can. You are going heavy, but you're just going through a good full range of motion. That's going to help you recover from that long run because you're probably a little stiff, a little stove up from that run. So this is going to help you recover because you're going through that full range of motion. You're getting some blood flow as opposed to just fully resting or even just swimming, because you're still getting through that full range of motion. If you have a hard interval session, say on Wednesday or Thursday, then you'd want to do that strength training right after that, as far as not right after, but the next session after that. You could potentially do a hard bike or interval bike. It's not too long, and then do some strength training like immediately after that. And again, that's going to help you recover a little bit because you're moving through that full range of motion. You're getting some blood flow to your legs, and that's going to aid with recovery. So it's a little bit harder to work in there with the triathlon training because you've got the 3 different disciplines. But that's how I would kind of see. That's how I look at it from the starting point: is when are my hardest sessions, and I want to do my strength training pretty much right after those or the next session after those, because it's less about doing them right after that. And I did talk about the benefits of that, but as far as aiding in recovery and whatnot, but it's more about if you do them right after your hard session, that by default, that means it's going to be as far as possible away from your next hard session. And so that's really why we want to do that, because if I do a strength training session, say on Monday after that long run on Sunday, well, my next hard run session isn't going to be at least for another 2 or 3 days. So that gives us time to recover from that strength training session. Another thing we want to think about is the amount of eccentric loading that we're getting in our movements. So eccentric loading is the lowering portion or the negative portion of the movement. That's also where the muscle tissue gets broken down the most, and that's where our soreness comes from. So if we don't have any eccentrics, then we're not going to get much soreness. A prime example would be running versus biking. You get a lot more sore from running than you do biking. First off, if you've been running for years and you don't get sore from it, but when you first start, you get more sore from running than biking. You can go out on a bike ride and not really get that sore from it. And that's because there's no eccentric load on the bike. So there's no landing, there's no impact on that. And so it's the same thing. Like if you're doing, say, a split squat where you're lowering yourself on the way down, controlled manner, and then you come back up fast, as opposed to like a step up where you're just stepping up and you come down relatively fast. So there's less eccentric in that step up. Then that's going to be, depending on the time of year, you'll want to do those, especially as you get closer to the race. You'll want to do things like that that don't have much eccentric in it. So like a deadlift, you may, early in the year, you may do the lowering portion, but as you get closer to a race, you may drop it from the top or drop it to wherever you stop, pick it up, drop it, pick it up and drop it. So you're not getting that eccentric, which is going to not, it's going to give you that nervous system drive and the tension that you want from the strength training, but it's not going to give you that over eccentric load where you're getting soreness and it's negatively affecting you. So, you know, you could do a couple of sets of heavy deadlifts and drop it from the top and you'll be good and feel good for your run session later that day or the next day with no problem. So keep in mind and that again depends on the time of year, because eccentric loading is very good for building tissue strength. So building muscle strength, building tendon and ligament strength, you do want to do slow eccentrics for that. So depending on the movement, you may want, and specifically the time of year, if you're far away from your race, like right now, it's December. So, and where I am, there's not much racing going on. It's hot, or sorry, it's cold. And so there's not much racing going on. It's the off season. And so now is the time to be doing some of those things with more eccentric, more loading on those tissues and on those tendons to build up a good base level of strength and durability in those tissues for as you get closer into the race season, you're going to be wanting to do less of that. And so you want to build that now so that you have that foundation, so you have strong muscles and joints for that time of the year. So thinking about that when you're doing it, as far as, so that talks about how to lay it out in a kind of a weekly structure, and then how to think about it from a movement standpoint, as far as how much eccentric, how much loading we're getting on those tissues. Then from a how, as far as movements and sets and reps and all that kind of stuff you want to think about. We talked about a little bit before in the why video, but we want to be doing for our big muscle groups. You want to be doing big muscle group pieces like lunges, squats, deadlifts. You want to be doing those because it's going to give you the best bang for your buck. Obviously, if you're doing that, if you've never done it before, have a qualified eye looking at you, a coach looking at you to help you with that technique and make sure you're doing it right. There's no point in doing it, especially with your goals, if you're not going to be doing it right. So we want to be doing this to prevent injury, not cause injury. So do stuff that's low hanging fruit. I'm a big fan of doing for my clients, doing movements that are very simple from a execution standpoint, so that there's less risk of doing the movement wrong. But you want to be doing big muscle group movement. So you only want to be doing 3 or 4 sets tops. And that's kind of more in the off season. As you get closer to the race, you want to be doing 2 or 3 sets, but three sets is a good kind of number of big muscle group movement. So if you're doing lunges for the day or squats or deadlifts, 3 good quality sets is going to be good. And like I said, this is roughly speaking, but 8 to 10 kind of farther away from the race. And as you get closer to the race, doing 3 to 4 reps is kind of what you're looking for. And those should always be leaving a little bit in the tank. So you never want to be, I won't say never, but most of us, if you don't have, especially if you don't have a background in strength training or movement, you don't need to or want to do maxes or anything like that. So you always want to leave, it's called reps in reserve, as far as leaving some in the tank. If you're doing a set of 5, you want to be able to do it with a weight that you could maybe do 6 or 7 with. And so leave a little bit in the tank. And then, so that's how to lay it out from a weekly standpoint, kind of getting it away from those hard sessions, how to, from a sets and reps a little bit. And then again, as far as choosing movements, I want to get into, I'll do plenty of videos on, and I have videos already done on other movements and why they're beneficial, but you want to be doing movements that are recruiting a lot of muscle groups and taking you through a full range of motion. That's the biggest thing that I see with weaknesses in endurance athletes, is they have very limited range of motion. And so the reality is, unless you're probably flexible if you enjoy stretching. If you're not, then you probably don't enjoy stretching. So trying to ask you to stick to a stretching routine is hard. It's a big ask because you're probably not going to do it because it's not fun. It's boring, and it, quite frankly, it doesn't feel very good if you're not good at it and you don't naturally enjoy it. So what we want to do is do strength training movements that take us through a full range of motion, which is basically loaded mobility work. So if I can't get below parallel in the squat because my hips and my ankles and my knees are tight, well, if I'm doing a goblet squat where I'm holding the weight in front of me and I'm slowly working on slowly going down, getting that full range of motion as much as I can with good technique and good positions, then eventually I'll get lower and lower in that position with good technique. And that's basically loaded mobility work. And the reason I like loaded mobility work is because it sticks a little bit better. If we stretch for 2 minutes, then we may feel a little bit more loose right in that moment, but an hour or two later, we're going to be right back to where we were. And not to say that if you do that in a squat or a loaded mobility, that's going to stick forever, but it does stick a little bit longer. And the more you do it, the more it sticks. And so doing things like a lunge or a split squat, where that back hip flexor is getting a little bit of stretch, where your knee may elevate your front foot, where you're getting through a full range of motion on that front ankle or knee, and that's going to give you to a full range of motion. That's going to give you a little bit more kind of bang for your buck. Or if you're doing, like I said, like I talked about previously, getting out of that kind of forward motion and doing like a Cossack squat, which is like a lateral lunge or something like that. So you may struggle with that position at first, but as you do that and as you weight it, and it may not have to be weighted, it may be body weight, but that's loaded to an extent because your body weight is load. Then that's going to get more range of motion in those joints and everything, and keep that body a little bit healthier in those positions. So trying to work in where you're getting some mobility and some strength all in the same session, which allows you to do a 30 or 45-minute session and get a whole lot done. It gets you strength work done and your mobility work done instead of having to kind of break it into 2 sessions. So that's a little bit on the how I structure it from a weekly standpoint. What am I thinking about when implementing movements? What movements am I wanting to do? Like I said, in future, we'll get into more specifics on what movements specifically I like to do and how to do those movements and how they contribute to our success in triathlon. So that's it for today. Looking forward to chatting with you tomorrow. And we're going to get into some specifics on, before I get into movements, I want to get into some specifics on how I structure triathlon training. So we're going to talk about swimming, we're going to talk about biking, we're going to talk about running, we're going to talk about specifics on how I lay that out and my philosophies on training in general. So looking forward to getting to that, and we'll talk soon.